In 2006, while the rest of the world was busy losing their minds over the impending launch of Windows Vista, Dell was quietly churning out this. The Latitude D520. It's a charcoal slab of corporate dependability that feels less like a portable computer and more like a piece of gym equipment. It isn't pretty, but what it does have is a who's who of mid-2000s connectivity. We're talking infrared, PC card, FireWire, a capable set of speakers, and a quick-release optical drive that can be swapped for a second battery. Around the back you have a healthy array of ports that put modern dongle life to shame. You know, back when laptops were more laptop than they are today. Underneath, the user serviceability is delightful. The hard drive, the RAM, the CMOS, and the main battery are all easily accessible. There's a dedicated docking port and a push-button battery indicator. This unit has some honest signs of wear, and it also came with some mystery hair. But hey, that's the risk we take in the pursuit of vintage plastic. However, the road to nostalgia is paved with hazards. The moment I plugged in the AC adapter, it began shooting lightning bolts at me, and it's not hard to see why. If I want to see if this D520 even posts, I'm gonna have to play electrician. So with the world's cheapest soldering iron, I performed some dodgy repairs, a generous application of electrical tape, and this might just be terrible enough to work. I plugged the Franken cable back in and tested voltage. We're sitting at nearly 19.5 volts, which is close enough for spreadsheet work. So we plug it into the power point, hold our breath and pray to the gods of legacy silicon. Do we think it's actually going to power on? Of course it does. It's a Dell tank from 2006. It'll take more than a frayed wire and some mystery hair to stop this charcoal-coloured beast. Let's dive into the BIOS and see what we're actually dealing with. A quick flip through the menus reveals a surprisingly capable brain, an Intel Core 2 Duo T5500, backed by the Intel GMA950 integrated graphics. We've got a healthy 4GB of DDR2 RAM running at 667MHz, along with the luxury of both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Then there's the I/O. It's a museum of connectivity: Ethernet, a 56K modem, USB 2.0, VGA out, and even S-Video for all of your mid-2000s television output needs. We're now greeted by XP Home Edition in Hungarian and MSN Messenger. This takes me back to a simpler time of dial-up and questionable screen names. I noticed Core Temp was already installed, which is probably a sign this computer ran hot, and after a few minutes we're sitting at 54 degrees Celsius. That's definitely on the warmer side of where we want to be, but I suspect 2 decades worth of dust in the vents and some fossilized thermal paste are the culprits here. Aside from that, it's a remarkably clean install. We've got Media Player Classic, VLC, and well, that's about it, which means there's nothing left to do but shut this beast down and tear it to pieces. Disassembly of this machine is remarkably easy, a far cry from the adhesive-filled nightmares of today. 2 screws release the hard drive from the side, revealing the original 120GB Samsung SATA drive, and one more screw gains us entry to the RAM slot, and well, what do we have here? It's an extra CR2032 battery being used as a structural shim to hold down another CR2032. All this secured with a generous helping of duct tape. I'd like to blame the previous owner, but honestly, this looks like something I would have done in a moment of desperate brilliance. Regardless, 1 2GB stick of RAM is successfully liberated. After backing out the remaining underside screws, I had a slightly nervous moment with the plastic fascia. We all know that 20-year-old plastic loves to be bent about as much as fine china. Fortunately, it survived. A couple more screws and the keyboard flips forward, allowing me to unlatch the ribbon cable. From here, the LCD screen is unplugged and separated from the body. It's important to make sure that you don't miss any screws or cables that are plugged in. One more ribbon cable for the trackpad, and the palm rest pops right off. And yes, this is what we all came to see. 2 decades of dust, grime, and biological mysteries I'd rather not identify. The second RAM chip is now accessible and removed, followed by the surprisingly beefy, albeit filthy, internal boombox. Now I can finally separate the motherboard from the bottom shell. Removing the fan reveals some more of those questionable curly hairs. Truly the gift that keeps on giving. Once the heatsink is removed, we get a look at the prize, the socketed CPU. Yes, a real upgradable processor. The trackpad and buttons pop right out, and I have to say, I'm genuinely impressed. Despite a few tense moments prying at aged plastics, this laptop came apart with ease. Taking a long, hard look at the various biological contributions left behind by the previous owners, I decided that this shell is getting the full treatment. A thorough dousing in disinfectant, followed by a hot water rinse. While the shell was drying, I used a bit of epoxy resin to reinforce some of the weakened and cracked plastics. The mouse buttons, meanwhile, earned a long, luxurious bath in isopropyl alcohol. I have no idea what that brown residue was, and frankly, I'd like to keep it that way. A quick dust and vacuum around the motherboard cleans up things nicely. Now it's time to scrape off the remnants of what I can only assume is the original 2006 thermal paste. I'm fresh out of thermal pads, so the original one on the chipset will have to stay for now. But man, it really is a treat to see a socketed CPU. Upgradability used to be a standard feature, not a luxury. I'm applying the new thermal paste in a specific pattern that is mathematically guaranteed to anger at least 3 people in the comments below. With that art piece finished, we're ready to secure the cooling system back in place and see if our efforts have paid off. And boy oh boy, does it ever look sweet. This Latitude D520 hasn't looked this good since the mid-2000s. After a decent scrub and a little epoxy magic, it almost looks like it was worth the $16 investment. Before I eventually swapped to a solid-state drive and a clean install, I wanted to see how the current XP setup handles a cold boot. We're in at 29.6 seconds. That's significantly faster than I expected from this old mechanical drive. In fact, it officially takes first place on my XP fastest boot times leaderboard, mostly because it's the only machine I've tested so far, but a win's a win. However, the real success story is under the hood. Opening up Core Temp, we see the results of our questionable thermal paste application. We started at 43 degrees Celsius, which eventually settled down to an impressive 37 degrees at idle. It just goes to show a little bit of soap, a vacuum, and some fresh goo can make a world of difference to these old tanks. With a fresh English language install of XP on an SSD and a brand new battery finally giving this tank the portability it deserves, the D520 feels less like a $16 gamble and more like an old friend. There's a certain utilitarian charm to these mid-2000s Latitudes. They weren't trying to be thin and light, fashionable statements. They were built to be used, abused, and tossed into a carry bag at the end of a 9 to 5. While the consumer world was chasing shiny plastics and fragile hinges, Dell was over here building machines that, honestly, might outlast us all. It's a reminder of why I like to do this. Every machine we rescue from a dusty attic or an untested eBay listing is one less piece of history that's heading for landfill. These aren't just e-waste, they're the workhorses of a digital era that define the modern world. And for $16, I'd say this one was well worth the save. Let's play Was It Worth It? This is where I check eBay sold prices and see if I overpaid for my broken Dell. Market prices for these range from between $20 and $250 American dollars. Predictably though, the lower end buys you a grey box that has been stripped of its RAM, hard drive and processor, only to be listed as untested. All things considered, I think I've done rather well. Now it's time for our retro meter. For value I give it an 8, I really didn't pay much at all for this. Condition is a 4. Functionality is a 7, as most everything works. I put collectability as a 2, and finally for coolness and nostalgia, I gave it another 2, giving this Dell Latitude an average score of 4.4, which is an average Joe ranking for an average Joe laptop.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing.
I agree, Sam. I agree.